Most everyone in Ottawa knows the name Minto. It started in the 1950s as a small company called Mercury Homes, and the Greenbergs, over the next couple of decades, built it into one of Ottawa's largest and arguably most high-profile and award-winning real estate development and management companies. They've built over 77,000 new homes. They have over 17,000 rental apartments and homes under management, and their commercial portfolio boasts over 3 million square feet in industrial, retail, and office space. More importantly, the Greenbergs represent one of the most important philanthropic families in the Ottawa area. But that history could have turned out very, very differently. Our special guest today is Roger Greenberg, CEO of Minto Corporation. He was thrust into that role over 20 years ago, and by his own admission, totally unprepared. Roger's going to join us today. He's going to talk about the family business, the deaths and departures of the company founders, and the attitudes towards succession planning that made the risks taken early on a big gamble for Minto's future. Recently, Minto announced that for the first time ever, the operational leadership of the company is passing to the hands of a non-family member, Michael Waters. So in this episode, we're going to find out how a leader decides to give up control of a company. How do they choose the new leader? And what special challenges face a leader of a family enterprise? So come with me now for a very special one-on-one with Roger Greenberg. We're here with Roger Greenberg, CEO of Minto. Roger, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure being here.
In 1955, your four uncles, Louis, Gilbert, Laurie, and Irving, founded Mercury Homes, which was the predecessor for Minto. And they started building homes on a small scale at first, and I'd like to first ask you to frame your experience with that, a family-owned business. What were the influences first growing up in that kind of environment?
Sure. Keep in mind, I was born in 1955, just happened to be coincidental with when the company started. For the first number of years, as you said, it was a small organization just starting out. I don't think anybody had any sense of what Minto would eventually become. So I don't know my experiences, certainly through my first 10 or 15 years of life. I don't think they're any different than anybody else's. My dad would get up and go to work. He'd work long hours. He also got very involved in the community, had a number of different community activities. And so, dinners, I never saw him. I would see him, and he worked most Saturdays and probably part-day Sundays. So, I didn't get to spend an awful lot of time with my dad. So I don't know how different our experiences were probably until my teen years in terms of how we would grow up and how we would be. In my teen years, once I finished going to camp, etc., I started working at Minto in the summertime. So certainly for probably, I'm going to say probably 5, maybe 6 summers, I worked for Minto in the summertime at a variety of different jobs. So that, I think, gave me a different understanding, a different perspective of the breadth of what Minto did and was involved in. And that's really where I started. But, chats around the dinner table, those never took place. The business, what it was doing, where it was growing, where it was going, doing things. I mean, those were the kind of conversations that my father and my uncle, because by that point in time, 1970, Minto was my father and my uncle Irving. I don't think our experiences were not one where we were involved heavily in the business at all.
Roger, your uncle Irving was the last of the original Greenberg brothers to run the company. He passed away in 1991. You had said at that point, and I quote, that when he passed away, he left a huge hole in the company. And I just want to take a second and explore that with you. What his passing meant to you both personally and professionally?
Well, I think to go back to your comment or your question a little bit earlier, I mean, that's where sort of business and family lines tend to blur that you might not see if it's not a family business or you're not part of the family, because events that we were at frequently would spill over between a family event and a business event. So we would have my son's bris, for example, a Jewish ceremony after a young Jewish boy is born, and we moved quickly from that very happy moment into a much more challenging moment, because we had some issues with a building that we had under construction. And so you flip from one to the other. You learn to be very adept at the ability to change hats very quickly.
So sometimes the board table is the dinner table.
Well, it does, it very much so. I mean, and that as we got older and once we were active in the business, I mean, to my uncle, which I perhaps didn't appreciate at that time, there was really no separation between family and business. To him, it was just a full cycle. And whenever we would go away on trips, he invariably was looking at things and ideas. I remember one trip in the mid 1980s, my poor aunt Shirley, and had to go to 4 separate hotels. We were at a family function, and they stayed, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, always in 4 different hotels, because he was doing research for what would become Minto Suite Hotel in Ottawa. He wanted to understand suite hotels, what they did, how they're different, and so he wanted to experience sleeping a night in each of the 4 different hotels that were in New York.
So the pleasure trip became the business trip.
Well, for him, I think for him it was seamless between the two. There were elements of everything. So even during the day at work, there were elements of family that would come in. I remember one day he came down to Toronto when I graduated from law school. He took a day off work to accompany my mother, who was a widow by this point in time, to come down to Toronto. He didn't like the idea that she would come down to Toronto by herself to come to my graduation. So he, as busy as he was at the time, he made it his business to take her down to come and to join in the ceremony and then to go out for dinner with us afterwards. So, there are a number of things that really made it seamless between what was business and what was family. You couldn't tell the line sometimes.
After his passing, the reins of the company leadership fell to you. You've also been quoted as saying that there was a clear state of unpreparedness that would never again occur in the company. You weren't prepared for that transition.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about
absolutely.
that.
My uncle had cancer, and during the summer of 1990, there were 2 evenings where doctors told us he would not make it through the night, and everybody rushed from all over North America to come home. And of course, as luck would have it, he was fine, he recovered, and life continued on. He never talked about succession, though. Like, he was always, there's a lot of business. We never talked politics, we never talked sports, we always talked business. But he never talked about succession. He never really talked about what life would be like after he was no longer around, even though he had these 2 near-death experiences. So when ultimately death did come to him in early 1991, we had no succession plan. We had nothing written down, nothing really talked about. There's no sense of what would happen after he was gone. And to me, as I've described it to family and to friends, it was like the equivalent of, we went to Vegas, we went up to the roulette wheel, we put our entire fortune and the lives of all of our staff and their future, etc., on a roulette wheel on red, and said, let's let it spin and we'll see what happens. Now, fortunately, as hindsight would show you, the roulette wheel landed on red. I don't think that that's a particularly good way to plan for the future, and to chance things, everything. But that's a fairly common situation with family businesses. Yeah. The owners are focused on the here and the now. They don't contemplate what will happen when they're not around, and that's why there's such a poor success rate for transition of family businesses from first to second generation, or from second to third generation.
One of the hardest things for business owners, especially founders, is trying to understand in their own heart when a good time to step down is. In your case, your grandfather, 2 uncles, and your father all passed away before 60 of heart attack. And your Uncle Irving lived to 62, passed away of cancer. Your mom died of cancer at 59. In the 60s, your uncles Louis and Laurie left the company earlier for health reasons than one would normally expect that tenure to be ended. So to what degree did family history play on your thoughts about succession planning?
Well, it's been part of our life, our entire life. And so I can't imagine what it's like for friends of mine that I know that they have parents that are in their 80s, and they have Sunday night dinner with them on a regular basis. It's so foreign to me. So I knew when I took over at 35, Irving passed away in 1991, I was 35 years old, I became president. I said to the family right then and there, I'm going to run things until I'm 50, and then it's time to figure out what's going to happen after that. Because I felt that having the burden of responsibility for 15 years and then to be able to enjoy life if things were successful for whatever period of time I had left would be sufficient. Now, when I got to be about 43, 44, 45, all of a sudden, 50 seemed to be coming awfully quick, a lot quicker than I expected. And my kids are still very young, so I said, okay, I'll stay till 55, but that's it. So, I mean,
I'm serious this time.
Well, more serious, because
more
it'll
serious.
actually be 58 before I step back.
Yeah.
So, like, this has been part of our fabric. Everybody has understood that, you know, my view was there was no glory in the business going out feet first. I wanted to you know, walk away from the operating responsibilities. It's a very important term we'll come back to, I'm sure. But I want to walk away from operating responsibilities while I still was healthy and could walk out as opposed to be carried out.
You and I talked before this episode a bit about the difference between leaving something and transitioning. And I just want to, you use that word very effectively when we talked, and I just want you to explore that with me.
Well, in a typical public company, you know, there's a very abrupt end and a very abrupt beginning when a new CEO comes on board. So there's a defined time frame where the old CEO leaves on a Friday and he or she is gone. And their institutional memory, their experience, everything is gone because the board doesn't want the new CEO to feel like the old CEO is sort of looking over their shoulder. So one leaves on Friday, the next one starts on Monday, and then, you know, they're off to the races with the new CEO. It's a very abrupt transition, and I think it's one that really is unfortunate, because if you've had a capable CEO, I think there's a lot of mentoring that could take place. So with us, in a private company, we don't have to worry about those sorts of things. I really see my role over the next 3 years with my successor that we're going to be partners. I'm going to have the title of executive chair for probably 2 to 3 years. I will work very closely partnering with my successor and acting as his mentor, and, you know, on strategy, major acquisitions, major dispositions. And then as he gets comfortable with his responsibilities and the family and the board, you know, are comfortable with him as a first non-family CEO, you know, likely 3 years from now, I'll transition back. I'll drop the executive component of my chair, and I'll spend less and less time as time goes on and allow him to assume more and more responsibilities.
I know a lot of viewers of this episode will include business owners and family business owners. And so I want to talk a little bit about the succession planning process. We alluded to it at the start, and I want to get into a little bit more. That's an unknown process, probably because most family businesses don't think a lot about succession planning. So let's take the first step. Let's look at how it started and who was involved.
Right. Well, again, I'd go back. The public experience is CEOs traditionally last in the job for 5 years. So for public companies and public company boards, I mean, succession planning is something that's ongoing and very regular, and they do it on a regular cycle. Family businesses generally do it once in a person's lifetime. Yeah. So there's no experience. You don't really know. You're starting from a new playbill. What we decided to do is go at this very, very purposefully. With a lot of planning. We hired consultants. We went, you know, we researched the marketplace to find 3 or 4 consultants to interview. We interviewed them. We talked to them. We ultimately selected, it was 2 gentlemen that we selected to come on board and work with us. They worked with us for probably 2 years. And I've continued with one of them even afterwards as a sort of a mentor and a coach to me. He's in his 60s, mid-60s. He's got a wealth of experience. He has been a leadership training individual and has worked with CEOs and succession planning for 35 years. So he's seen it all, done it all. He understands that every company is different. So he simply provides advice and guidance to me and then recognizes that ultimately I then have to make decisions for what's right for Minto and for the Greenberg family in terms of our circumstances. But to have someone to talk to who's gone through it before has been immensely helpful. So our board, even as a private company, we do have a board with 4 independent members. They've been a tremendous source of advice as well. So I think between the two, consultants on the one hand, board members on the other hand, we've had a lot of advice given to us. Ultimately, I have to accept responsibility for executing on whatever the advice that's given, and I, take responsibility for that. But we've had a lot of help in trying to sort through concepts, and I found that very, very useful.
Of all the stages and the elements of the succession planning process, this at least a 2-year, maybe 3-year process, what were some of the things that stick out in your mind as the things that gave you the most surprise or the most trouble?
Well, as part of the process, it wasn't just me that was transitioning. It was also my 2 brothers, my 2 younger brothers that transitioned. And we sort of jokingly referred to them as our consigliere, our longtime consigliere, also stepped back. So, one of the processes that we had to go through was to work on a timing for who would leave when, because we felt it would be a disaster for the company if everybody retired at once. And then the corollary was we had to hire replacements that came on board. And I was very nervous about the replacements because these are new people, and I was concerned about how well they would fit within the mold of what we had created. And so we're very pleasant surprise was to find really competent, capable people. We have a management team now that I think are just superb. They get along extremely well with each other, and they're creating lots of value for the organization. So I think I've been really pleased, with that. I think that the challenges have been, for all 3 brothers, 2 have already gone through the process of leaving up their operating responsibilities. I'm only still speculating how I'm going to react come October, but that is a bit of a challenge when you don't have the job day to day. And for my brothers, they're younger than me, so I'm okay at 58, doing one way. But my brothers are younger than that, and so they're still trying to sort out well, what do they do with the rest of their life, because they don't want to just clip coupons, as the expression says. Yeah.
A lot of people will recognize the name Sam Bronfman. Mm-hmm. Sam Bronfman was the founder of Seagram's when it was a major worldwide distiller. And in his interview, in fact in his biography, Mr. Sam, he was interviewed and he was asked, is there one thing that he's most afraid of? And he took no time in answering, and he said, you bet. He said, for the family to go from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And at that time, shirt sleeves meant the lowest level of physical labor out there. What he was worried about was that the family would not survive the 3rd generation. So you alluded to giving up operational leadership, but not strategic, and I want to come back to that now. So we're separating operational leadership, and the family is still involved, but how many members of the 3rd generation were there in the company, or are there in the company right now? There
are none that are in the operations today. We had our children much later in life as compared to my father and my uncle, who had their kids, at a much earlier stage. So we have some family members who are literally in grade school, some who are going through university right now. There are a couple of them that have been graduated from university, and some that have been graduated, 3 or 4 years. What we did, as part of a family business planning process, a lot of research has suggested that children in family businesses benefit greatly from working outside the business environment for 3, 4, 5 years.
And then bringing that experience.
They need to be treated as somebody other than, the owner's son. They need to be treated that way. They need to gain confidence that whatever they're given, it's because they've earned it, not because, you're always questioning otherwise. Well, why was I promoted? Was it promoted because of my last name, or am I doing a good job? Yeah. So discipline and promotion and all of that sort of stuff, it's very important to gain a sense of self-confidence outside of the business environment. And then when you're ready to come back into the business or come into the business environment, you need to make sure that there's a job that suits the skill sets of the individual concerned. So We've had family members work in a business in the summertime. We're waiting to see, who wants to come into the business, because again, just because I have a passion for real estate doesn't mean I expect my children or my nephews or nieces to have that passion. I don't want them to come to Minto unless they have that passion, unless they really want to work at the company. We should not be an employer of last resort. We should be an employer of first resort when they are ready and willing and able to come to work hard.
We said earlier that family businesses share a lot of commonality with non-family businesses, but one of the ones that they are unique in is the biases and the pressures that occur within a family. And sometimes family owners feel themselves pushed to make decisions in order to respect the dynamics within the family, as opposed to the more logical, or some would say colder, decisions that have to be made to preserve the wealth and value that's been built up over time. Now, your children were younger, and certainly they would be possible to become into the operational side of the company, but certainly not at the level that you're vacating.
If I were, in 1991, if I were on the board, if I were a 60-year-old on the board of Minto, and I see that, the tentative leader of the next generation is 35 years old with his background and skill sets, would I have recommended that individual to become president? Probably not. The fact that it worked out is a happy coincidence or happenstance. I'm not sure that we would do that then. We're certainly not going to do it now because the stakes are much higher. The company is bigger. There's more at risk. There's more mouths at risk in terms of Minto employees, Minto shareholders, etc. So we are going a lot more rigorous today than we were back in 1991, where really, let's be honest, the reason I became president was because my last name was Greenberg. If my last name wasn't Greenberg, there's not a chance I would have become president. Now we're saying, who's the best qualified to lead Minto, given that I'm stepping back? And as we survey the third generation with their levels of experience, they're not there. They're not there today. They may be down the line, but we're only talking about today. We're not making a commitment that our CEO, Michael Waters, is going to be the CEO for the next 60 years, or that his replacement in whatever time, I hope it's 20, 25 years, it's not, we're saying that his replacement is going to be a non-family member either. We'll have to wait and see how
we're talking about a stage in
absolutely.
Hopefully a very long history of a company.
What we want as a family is we want our children to be, at a minimum, good shareholders of Minto. And by good shareholders of Minto, I mean someone who follows the fortunes of the company, comes to the shareholder meetings, elects a board of directors. Hopefully one or two family members will be on that board of directors, and they'll be interested in the company, and they'll follow what's going on, and they'll be proud of what it does. That's what we're establishing as a baseline for what we'd like to see. Anything above that in terms of family members working in the business is a bonus. And then if we want to really hit a grand slam home run, is that somebody from the family ultimately would step into the shoes of a CEO. But that's not our current expectation that'll happen, because we don't want to put pressure on the next generation. We want them to, aside from that base level, which doesn't require a full-time commitment, we want them to be doing stuff that really brings joy and purpose into their life. If it happens to be in Minto, wonderful. But if it happens to be in something outside of that, in the arts field, in the cultural field, whatever, that's fine as well. We want them to be happy. That's happy, productive members of society is our first goal for them.
Whether we're talking about a family leader or a non-family member leader, what do you value most in terms of leadership? When you look at a great leader, What do you see? What do you
Integrity.
remark on?
Call it honesty, call it, high moral values. Integrity is what I prefer, but it's sort of dancing around the same thing. Number one, personal integrity.
And when we've seen so many companies in the news, so many organizations, governments, financial institutions, even local companies, you see that missing. You can see the damage done.
Yeah, I'll let you say that. I don't want to draw the obvious conclusion, but that's what we like to believe, that we're a values-based company, and I wanted a person, I think the family wanted a person that had high moral standards and high integrity to lead the company, because at the end of the day, certainly for the shareholders, what is it that they own? They want a company that they can be proud of. Yes, we're in a business of providing shelter for people, whether it's offices or houses, and it's a very noble thing to be doing. But aside from financial returns that we're going to get for the capital that we have invested, they want a company they can be proud of, that they can be proud to say, we're an owner of Minto. And you don't get that if you don't have management that's performing in a consistent manner with your expectations.
You mentioned that the worst situation or a bad situation is when the going out president and CEO is here Friday and then gone, and somebody else comes in Monday. There's no continuation. Luckily, you're still going to be around. You're still going to be working with Michael as you have over the last couple of years. So my question to you is, what are you looking for? What do you think you'll be looking for to ensure that the transition is smooth? What main things are you going to be looking for to help him be set up for success?
Well, first and foremost, that we're completely open and transparent with each other. So we've developed certain routines, I would call it, that if we don't challenge each other in meetings that we're running, if there's something that one says to the other that is in any way, shape, potentially demeaning or whatever, we try to catch things in the moment. So as soon as the meeting's over, if there's something that's happening, we don't let things fester. We talk about it in an open environment right away. Michael is continuing to use a coach. I meet regularly with him and his coach to help him, because this is a big step up for him. I started when the company was literally very small, and I grew with it. He's stepping into a big shoes to fill, and so there is a lot of concern. He's a very, very serious man, and in many ways, and takes the responsibility as being CEO probably more serious than I do. So sometimes I need to work him through his intensity. And so as long as we can be open and forthright with each other, don't play games with each other, I think we're going to be fine. And that's certainly been the hallmark of our relationship in the 7 years that he's been at Minto.
My last question, Roger. Decades from now, if you can look back on the time that you've had with Minto as leader, in roughly one sentence, what would you like to hear people say about your leadership?
I think that he treated people with respect. That for those who had the good fortune to work with at Minto, that they enjoyed their time working at Minto, and that I wouldn't describe myself as a fun person, so I can't say that they had fun working at Minto. Nobody would use the word fun when describing me, but they would say that they enjoyed the work, they found it meaningful, and that I respected their views, and we worked well together.
Roger, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
One of the most difficult challenges any leader will face is the eventual decision as to when to give up control. And that action creates real uncertainties. Personally, what do I do on a day-to-day basis when I'm no longer running this operation? Professionally, what leader should be chosen to replace me for the good of the company? But from this half hour, we've seen one thing that's crystal clear. Any leader owes it to the long-term value of their organization to plan for that eventuality, or risk everything ignoring it. In addition, taking enough time and getting the proper advice can make a big difference in a successful handoff for its sustainability and long-term value. And that's what we work hard to reveal in every episode, every time we unlock the leadership door. Thank you for joining us. I'm Richard Clayman, and until next time, goodbye.